This is Christine Barr. You're watching Black Tea News. Hello, welcome to Black Tea News. I'm your host, Christina Barr, and today I'm pretty sure going to be covering this one subject, so I didn't write that we're going to really talk about anything else. It might take up the whole hour, perhaps it will not. But Kate Cox lives in Texas, and she's been all over the news. She has a diagnosis for her baby that is usually fatal. In her case with her baby, everyone's pretty much sure that if it survives up till birth, it may be stillborn or maybe have a few hours at the most days. So she wanted to get an abortion, and at first the in Texas, you're not supposed to, and except for like very strict circumstances, life of the mother and like seriously bodily harm, injury and stuff, qualifies. So she got a court to agree that she could have it, and then the attorney general came in and said no, you can't have it. And so the Supreme Court in Texas made a ruling, and they ruled in favor of the attorney general against Kate. So she's actually going out of state apparently to go ahead and have the abortion. And so there's a lot of conversations around this particular case. I haven't said much about it because I hadn't taken the time to really read up on it, but I've seen a lot of conversations about it, and what people deem as like the horror and the cruelty of the pro-life movement, and so on and so on. Even people who lean pro-life or consider themselves to be pro-life are really, really conflicted about this particular issue. So I went ahead and I read the court decision by the Supreme Court, and I'm like, okay, well, based on what they're saying in the decision, it seems to make sense how they've reached this particular verdict. And then I went back and read the original lawsuit that was filed, and I'm like, okay, I kind of don't see how they could have ruled in a different sort of way. So there's a lot of misinformation about the case. It's a tragic case. It's a tragic diagnosis, which makes these conversations difficult. And I hope that we have a mature audience here today that aren't going to just sling accusations like you just want women to suffer, and I hope people on our side aren't like they just want to kill their baby. Like it is a complicated issue, certainly, but just because something is complicated doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it and weigh the ethics of all that stuff. So there's some people who I follow who are in the pro-life movement. There's been vocal people about it, and then there's been other people I was waiting to kind of see what they say, and I disagreed with some takes and other takes, and so I haven't seen a lot of people kind of thoroughly go through it. So I'll try my darndest to really talk about it. But before I jump into this conversation, kind of advance forward with it, I want to encourage you guys, go to blacktnews.com, check out different content on my website, articles, videos, etc. If you like what I do here, please consider leaving a donation at blacktnews.com/donate. It does cost to stream and run my website, all that stuff, so you guys can support in that way. I very much do appreciate it. Those of you who do support and can support, if you're watching on Facebook, you guys can give stars. If you're watching on YouTube, you guys can do super chats. I do read the super chats, unless they're like weird or something. Not weird, but like you guys probably can gather what which ones I probably wouldn't read. Also, I do have different merchandise on this website you guys can check out and that you guys can get, like different mugs and different t-shirts, like the mug here, black tea mug. Got the black tea mug. I got the My Money My Business, which I did make that because of the abortion debate. So many people say it's not your business, and there's just a lot of things that, I mean, they're trying to in Michigan to have taxpayers fund it, for example. So things like that, I would say it's kind of my business. I think beyond that as well, but the reason why that shirt was made, but there's other shirts as well. And something that's very relevant. You guys know that I do write books, and I wrote a book earlier this year. Well, I was released it earlier this year. Of course, God is blatantly against abortion. It's available in Barnes and Noble. It's also available on Amazon, paperback or ebook. And of course, it talks about theology, but it covers rights and science and politics and all sorts of stuff. And I took the time to really talk about the exceptions as well. It's a very well versed book on the topic of abortion and not just like a theology sort of thing. People ask like, why'd you bring the theology into it? Because people bring it up regardless all the time. And I just wanted to debunk a lot of things that people said and have some kind of better way that people of faith can explain their morals with and without kind of referencing the Bible, and make the case that even if you're not religious, why these morals that we believe and stand by are good for society. But I also wanted to talk about the exceptions, um, like in case of sexual assault, incest, life of the mother. And I did also talk about medical complications involving the baby when you have maybe like a grim diagnosis like trisomy 18, or in cases where the doctors um, diagnosed other things, maybe they are wrong. Doctors can be wrong. Maybe sometimes something miraculous sort of happens and you don't know why there was a turnaround, but it seems like there was a turnaround. And I'm a person of faith. I believe in the power of prayer and all that stuff, but it is a reality that children do die. And I can't imagine something more tragic for a parent. I'm not a parent. Um, it was hard enough in like situations where my dad was in the hospital, my sister was in the hospital not too long ago after she had her baby, and I was so I was trying to keep up the faith and be encouraged and stuff, but it was difficult. So to be in a situation where you're told that your child will die and there's nothing that you can really do about it, and you're faced with, are you going to carry them to term or are you going to have an abortion? That's a really heavy topic, and um I don't want people to harshly judge women who would make that decision too harshly, even though we may come to the conclusion that it's not the right decision. It's something that I don't think I don't think it's talked about enough or a lot. Fetal abnormality. We don't even have a lot of conversations about it, I think, in the pro-life community, like, especially compared to like other exceptions and conversations, because I do think it's really difficult, because I think kind of the most persuasive pro-choice arguments are the ones that tug on your emotional heartstrings. I don't think there's a lot of logical like things, like people like, oh, fetal viability, and I don't think those things make a lot of sense, but I can understand these sort of pleas. um but again, just because something does stir us in a particular way, and we can even say, I understand that, I even think that's reasonable or maybe rational on your part, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a moral decision. So we'll get into questioning the ethics of those sorts of things, but I want to talk about the case itself first, because there's a lot of things that people believe, and a lot of things that people are spreading around, and are like, oh, the pro-life community is so cruel, when the case itself, if you just go by like, you can be upset at the law. You can think that needs to be clear, and perhaps it really does need to be clear, because there's hospitals and that won't perform particular care because they don't want to be liable. And maybe that's too much, I don't know, fear mongering on their part, or too, because there's been such fear mongering, uh people are so afraid to act. But I would love more clarification so these situations don't happen. But I do think it's, there's a lot of conflation with the pro-choice community, so they can just expand the access into elective abortion. I think there's a lot of things that are more malpractice and not necessarily the laws being at fault. But we can have those conversations, and we can make more distinctions in the law, so there's less confusion and complications and stuff. But this particular case, I don't see how the Supreme Court could have ruled in a different way. So Kate Cox is, I believe, 31 years old. She has two children already. She's married, and so she's pregnant with her third child. Her two children that she had, both had to do C-sections, and when you have a C-section, the doctors tend to want to keep doing that for reasons that they say. I've heard some people like, you don't need to do that. I don't know if that's the case or not the case. I know in my sister's case, her doctors, did encourage and to continue having C-sections. They say it's just safer to do it that way after you had one. And I've heard people say that's a conspiracy. They just want to do that because I don't know. I don't know that that's the case, but I do know that doctors tend to want to continue doing that. So after my sister had her first one natural, well, she had it like an epidural or whatever, but so she, napped. It wasn't, painful like it should have been. The second baby came so fast they couldn't give her any epidural or whatever. She said it felt like being ripped in two. And I was supposed to be in the room to see the baby born and all that stuff, and missed it. um and the third baby like wouldn't put her arm down or something, so they're like, we have to do a C-section. And it was like an emergency C-section and stuff. And so she's a little troublemaker. So aggressive, my niece. And then so her next baby, they had a scheduled C-section. And then the baby she just had, they also had a scheduled C-section. But the older you get, the more times you do, there are risks that compound and compound and compound. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be fatal or anything like that for you to have a baby, or that it's too risky to have a baby. But just understand that um the older you get, if you're heavy, and they'll say, hey, you have these risk, or you're high risk and whatnot. Even though someone might say you're high risk, and it might not be that like you're imminently close to death or it's gonna happen. They're just like, hey, you're older, you're on the heavier side. A certain age, they call you geriatric. And so anyway, she got a diagnosis for her baby, I think around 16 weeks, that they had trisomy 18, and it's a chromosomal disorder. And now some it's usually fatal in boys. There's babies that can live with it, but usually they miscarry, they're stillborn, or you might have cases where they just live a couple hours afterwards. So the doctors are like, you will not have long with this baby if you have this baby. So she talked to her doctors, and she opted, they said, hey, you continue on with pregnancies, there's these different risks that could occur because that you've had prior C-sections because of the fetal diagnosis and so on. And you don't want to have potential health risk, or have risk where if you induce, they could, cause this to happen, or you could, need a hysterectomy if you have a C-section here, et cetera, et cetera. So she made, I guess, I don't want to say made peace, but came to the conclusion that no matter what, she's going to have to say goodbye to this baby. And it's a matter of when she's going to say goodbye. And she would rather not carry the baby to term and then go through further risk. So let me read a little bit from the lawsuit that puts some things into her words. After much discussion with her husband and her family, Miss Cox decided that terminating this pregnancy is the right decision for her family. In her own words, it is not a matter of if I will have to say goodbye, but when. I do not want to continue the pain and suffering that has plagued this pregnancy. I do not want to put my body through the risk of continuing this pregnancy. I do not want to continue until my baby dies in my belly, or I have to deliver a stillborn baby, or one where life will be measured in hours or days, full of medical tubes and machinery. Trisomy 18 babies that survive birth often suffer cardiac or respiratory failure. I do not want my baby to arrive in this world only to watch her suffer a heart attack or suffocation. I desperately want the chance to try for another baby and uh, want to access the medical care now that gives me the best chance at another baby. Um, so that's the reason why she wants it. And in the lawsuit, now if you've listened to the media, if you've listened to people talk about this on social media and stuff, they're saying things like she is going to die. If they're denying her this life-saving abortion, it could ruin her fertility, etc., blah blah blah. It sounds very dire from the kind of rhetoric that I'm hearing online. um However, in the lawsuit itself that they filed, there's like a pro-choice group who filed on behalf of her and her doctor. um they said while Miss Cox's life may not be imminently at risk, so they admitted in the lawsuit that she's not facing an imminent risk, but they do say she is high risk for many serious medical conditions that pose risks to her future fertility and can become suddenly and unexpectedly life threatening. So they're saying it's not imminent, but we're speculating is what's going on here. So I read the Supreme Court ruling first before I read the lawsuit. And so again, when I read the lawsuit, I'm like, okay, well, gosh, it makes sense what they're saying. But let me go back and read the lawsuit. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really don't see how they could have made much of another decision, especially since they say it right there in black and white that it wasn't an imminent life-threatening situation. They also say in the document in their court filing that they're operating out of good faith as opposed to reasonable medical judgment. In the court, you can say, I don't think that's a meaningful enough distinction. Well, apparently they thought it was meaningful enough to not just go ahead and say medical judgment, reasonable medical judgment. And the court said that's the standard. And they did not make the case that they met the standard. So in the law, I just do want to make it clear that there is exceptions for the life of the mother, and there are exceptions for if there's going to be some kind of bodily harm. So I started writing this article. So I'm just going to read what I wrote because I have some quotes in here. First things first, it's important to note that it is absolutely legal to seek an abortion in Texas if the mother's life is in jeopardy, and that is to be determined by reasonable medical judgment, not the attorney general. It is also permitted to obtain an abortion if there's a serious risk of substantial impairment of a major bodily function, unless the abortion is performed or induced. The court even made it clear that a woman who meets the medical necessity exception need not seek a court order to obtain an abortion. Under the law, it is a doctor who must decide that a woman is suffering from a life-threatening condition during a pregnancy and raising the necessity for an abortion to save her life or prevent impairment of a major bodily function. The law leaves to physicians, not judges, both the discretion and the responsibility to excuse the reasonable to exercise the reasonable medical judgment, giving the unique facts and circumstances of each patient. So they're saying it. So if this was a case where it was like a real like she, she needs it to preserve her life, this wouldn't be a question according to the court. It's not up for a judge to say. It's like not up for the attorney general. Like it's your doctors who are supposed to be making that decision. And then there's even the same for the bodily impairment, which people argue that they're kind of confused about that. But the lawsuit did not rise to the confidence to rightly say that with our reasonable medical judgment. They said that in good faith. That's what they said. So they admitted it wasn't imminent. And as far as like the rest of the stuff, it's good faith and not reasonable medical judgment. So there's a lot of skewed perceptions that you would get just kind of being online. And I'm sure I haven't been on TikTok today, but I'm sure there's TikToks about it, and people talking about it on different TV shows, and people are talking about it on Twitter. And Ann Coulter said something along the lines of, well, not along the line. She said it was something about the pro-life community being cruel. Let me see if I can find that tweet really quick. I know, let me go to Allie Stuckley's page. I know she replied to it. I know she retweeted it. Ann Coulter, who, by the way, once said she didn't care if they did abortions at the White House as long as Trump built the wall. So she's had some interesting takes and priorities. The pro-life movement has gone from compassion for the child to cruelty to the mother and child. And trisomy 18 is not a condition that is compatible with life. And we don't know for sure. We know that it's likely that it's not compatible for life, just to be frank about her situation. And Allie said in response, a warped definition of cruelty you have here, and which is more cruel, delivering a baby that might die soon after birth while offering them the love and dignity they deserve, or dismembering them in the womb and throwing them in the trash. So people had a issue with how, I guess, blatant or blunt Allie was, but she's not wrong. I mean, I guess. So, if you've been hearing that people want her to die, want her child to die, and them just to suffer and all that sort of stuff, that's not the reality of the court case or what they really presented. So I question why they present their arguments like that. I'm like, were they just trying to cover their bases and not say within reasonable medical judgment? Did they want to have the court case and then probably fail so it could, I don't know, garner this sort of reaction politically? Because a lot of people, I mean, I've seen a ton of people talk about this and don't know that information. So that's why I thought it was important to have this conversation and talk about it. Because regardless of how you feel about her having to carry the child with trisomy 18, the question is, does she meet the threshold for the exceptions? And her lawyers didn't really make that case. Her lawyers really didn't make that case. And you could talk about the risks versus, I guess, rewards in her mind or other people's minds, because they're like, okay, why would you risk your body for a baby that is going to die, or suspect is going to die? And she wants, you can't make a determination. You can't control the lifespans of your children. You can't control whether or not they will be healthy. You can't control, I mean, to some degree, like you control their fat or something like that. But or dry to control whether they're fat or something like that. But like if they get cancer, that's out of your control. If they get hit by a bus or something, that's outside of your control. Um Tragedies do happen, sicknesses do happen, illnesses do happen. The only way that you can control whether or not with certainty whether your child is going to die is if you decide to take their lives yourself. So the question, I have no question that the Supreme Court probably made the right call here, looking at how they presented the case. So she's going apparently outside of the state to go seek an abortion. If she had qualified, she could have just gotten the abortion according to the law itself, according to the courts. But they wanted pre-authorization to perform the abortion, and her doctor needed that. I guess the hospital wanted that. I guess ace in the hole, that protection for the doctor and any staff that would perform the abortion before they themselves would do it. But again, they didn't make the case that it was that she qualified. Now, whether you think fetal anomaly should qualify in the law, like they amend it, is a different question, because based on the law at hand, the hands are kind of tied in this issue. I think the court made the right decision here, and the narrative is not accurate. What's going around. So if you want to have a conversation about whether you should be able to euthanize your children, um, and that's what the abortion at this point would be for. That's a bigger topic. So Supreme Court decision aside, the arguments aside, like I think that went the way that it legally, the only way that it probably could go. If we're being honest, if we need change in the law, they need to change the law. If they need clarification in the law, they need to do that. Though they said that the like medical boards and other stuff, should be making other sort of determinations or whatnot. I'm sure they'll have to, like, I don't know, tweak some things to get clarification, because there's women suing and doctors suing Texas. Those lawsuits are going forward right now. So I want these things to be, I want physicians to be as clear as possible. I think when it comes to like life of the mother exceptions and stuff, if within the reasonable medical judgment of the professional, I think they should be like, yeah, we need to act. And I don't want a woman to be like bleeding out or something like that. And the court said that, like, you don't have to be in a dire circumstance where they're hemorrhaging and all that stuff. That's not like the extreme that it has to go to, but they just simply didn't meet the threshold. Now, I talked about some stories in my book. Of course, God is blatantly against abortion, with a couple of people. And the first person I referenced was a father who was expecting to lose his child because of trisomy 18. And he was alarmed at how unpersoned his child was as soon as they got the death sentence. As soon as they found out that the child wasn't going to live, they, like, recommended abortion, I guess, a few times. And people just kind of treated him and his wife like a bother. And as he found more people like in support groups and who've dealt with those kinds of situations with that kind of diagnosis, they heard just about how their children didn't get the particular kind of care that they needed because people kind of wrote them off. And he said he believed that this was the result of living in a Roe v. Wade kind of world where people warp their minds around abortion and the devaluing of life. And so he made a decision within himself, or realized something within himself, that he's already his child's father. He's already a parent. And his child deserves the best care that they can possibly have, even though his child was going to die. So it's a really great article that I reference at least in my book and stuff, but it um I'm pretty sure it had me in tears. um the story about Ember, the Ember tour, that had me in tears. And it was another case with a baby with trisomy 18. And once they got that fetal diagnosis, the Baker family just decided that they would travel, go to their favorite places, and while the mom was pregnant, and try to spend life with her as much as they could. And when the baby was born, they had they asked, people to send in, different kind of artwork so they could put it all over the walls in the delivery room, because they just wanted her to be delivered in the most beautiful sort of setting. And uh they said it was such a hard experience, but it's such a beautiful experience at the same time. And the baby didn't live, very long, but she lived, peacefully with the family until she passed. And Mr. Baker, he said something along the lines of, we loved her well. So as long as you have your child for as long, whether it's, they live to be 102 like my grandmother, or they're going to live only for a couple minutes like Ember, do you love well? Do you treat them with the sort of human dignity that they deserve? And I had a line in my book. I guess I'll just open up and kind of go to it. Um, Sorry, I got to open it back up. It closed. Hmm. Here we go. I'm sorry, it's taking a minute, but I had a line in my book to get back to the religious aspect of it, is that we are not only parents to our children, we are made in the image of God, and we're called to love each other as if they are also made in the image God and loved by God. So if all of us have inherent dignity, inherent rights, inherent value, even if it's for a very short amount of time, do we have the sort of authority to be able to say we're going to cut that life short? Um, and those are the questions. Is it okay to euthanize that child? And if it's okay to do it in the womb, is it like I brought this up to someone I was going back and forth with on Twitter the other day, and they were like adamant like that you should be able to do it. I'm like, okay, so if you had a 1-year old or toddler or whatever, and they told you that they had a year to live, I said you would straight up just murder the kid. And they're like, why would you want them to suffer, and etc. And I said that people, they don't, like, you wouldn't try to make the most of the time that you have left and give them the dignity of a natural death. You would just murder them. And they ended up um just, I guess, walking away from the argument. But we're moving away from abortion into eugenics. That's what the conversation. I mean, well, I guess eugenics. I meant to say euthanasia, euthanizing the child. But yeah, it is eugenics as well. Especially if you look at the risk that she was, I guess, willing to take on. She'd still have risk to all those things that she was concerned about. And I don't know how much heightened it is based on her child's fetal diagnosis. Um, but those are risks that we're willing to assume if the child was healthy. What changed was that the baby got diagnosed with trisomy 18 and said that she would like to have another baby, make sure that she can have another baby. So if she's already the parent to the child that she has, and again, we can't control how long the lives of our children are unless we're determined to end them. So she could, I guess, trade this life for another one later and cut that child's life short. There's always possibilities that there could be complications with the abortion itself, or whether she could have another child and all sorts of things. But that's essentially the case that she's kind of making in the brief. So if you're like a conservative judge reading that, and you know she doesn't meet the threshold, and you know she's not in imminent danger, there's just no way that they were going to rule in that favor. There was just no way. Even if their heart breaks for her, I would never want to be in that situation. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But life is not always kind to us. We are not guaranteed a happy ending on this side of glory. We're just not. But that doesn't mean that we get to play God in this kind of way. And people will say, well, that's with all abortions, they think that's up to the mother's discretion, that's up to the mother's choice, which I think is so strange, because I'm like, no, you're saying that taking someone else's life should be up to this particular person. It's not like you're like, oh, I didn't want a baby, and you just kind of turn back time in your womb and as if nothing ever happened. That's not what an abortion is. It's taking a life. So when you say that you agree to that someone has this right to do it, you're just agreeing that they have the right to take a life. I don't think that we agree that someone has that choice in all circumstances. It's just apparently mothers that get to have this honor. And I'm obviously against it, but in these circumstances I can understand why people have an issue with taking a hard stance like that, because they don't want to be in a situation themselves, and they can empathize with a mother who has to carry a child knowing that they don't have long for this world. But the baby is 20 weeks. The baby is 20 weeks along. That's pretty significant. I mean, you're halfway there. The head is about the size of a plum. I think I want to go ahead and show you guys what a second trimester abortion looks like. So prepare, just so you know, because they're talking about the different risks that could happen with giving birth, which you're saying inducing or having a C-section. And if there was no fatal diagnosis with the baby, they'd still be having these procedures anyway. And I would hate to be in that situation and have to have a C-section on top of knowing that your child wasn't going to make it to. It's just a terrible situation. And again, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it's like a 2-day procedure. It could be 1 or 2 days, but they have to prepare their cervix. They have to stick these instruments up inside you. They have to suck up the fluid and all that stuff. So it's not a picnic. It will be shorter. Well, I guess if they have to take time to prepare the cervix, I guess it's not necessarily a shorter situation, but the abortion would be shorter than the C-section, I suppose. But just to let you know what is actually being asked right here. So this is a video that Live Action put out some time ago.
My name is Dr. Kathy Altman. I'm a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist with almost 33 years of experience, and I've completed over 500 abortions. Today, I'm going to describe a second trimester surgical abortion called dilation and evacuation, or D&E. A D&E is generally performed between 14 and 22 weeks of pregnancy. Before a D&E abortion can be done, the cervix must be dilated slowly over 1 to 2 days with laminaria or a similar product. Laminaria is a type of seaweed that absorbs water and swells to several times its original diameter. When the woman undergoes the evacuation portion of the procedure, she lies on a table with her legs in stirrups. She may be given injections of local anesthetic in the cervix, IV conscious sedation, or general anesthesia. The abortionist uses a speculum to open the vagina and uses an instrument to stabilize the cervix. Metal dilators may be used to further open the cervix if needed. Once the cervix has been stretched open, a cannula attached to suction tubing is placed inside the uterus. The suction machine is then turned on and the amniotic fluid surrounding the fetus is suctioned out. The fetus is too large to fit through the cannula, so he or she must be removed in pieces with a clamp such as this Sofer clamp. A Sofer clamp is made of stainless steel and is about 13 inches long. At the tip, there are rows of teeth for grasping. The abortionist reaches into the uterus with the clamp and tries to grasp an arm or leg. Once the abortionist has a firm grip, she pulls forcefully in order to remove the limb. Piece by piece, the abortionist removes the arms and legs, followed by the head or the body, including the torso and pelvis, along with the intestines, the heart, and the lungs. The placenta is also removed. If the cervix has been overdilated, the body or even the entire fetus may be pulled out intact. Usually, the most difficult part of the procedure is extracting the fetus's head, which at 20 weeks is about the size of a large plum. The abortionist must open the clamp widely to grasp the head and then crush it so that it will fit through the cervix. The abortionist knows he has crushed the skull when a white substance, the fetus's brains, leaks out through the cervix. The abortionist then removes the compressed head. Any remaining limbs, organs, bone fragments, or pieces of placenta not removed with the forceps are removed by scraping the uterine lining with a large curette or by reinserting the suction cannula. The abortionist then reassembles the fetal parts to make sure that there is nothing left inside the uterus, which could cause infection or bleeding. Once all the parts have been accounted for, the bleeding has been controlled, and all the instruments have been removed from the vagina, the abortion is considered complete. For the woman, this procedure carries a risk of major complications, including perforation or laceration of the uterus or cervix, with possible damage to bowel, bladder, or other maternal organs. Infection and hemorrhage can also occur, which can lead to death. Future pregnancies are also at an increased risk for loss or premature delivery due to abortion-related physical trauma and injury to the cervix. As I mentioned at the beginning, I used to perform abortions. At the time, I truly believed I was helping women. After the birth of my daughter, however, I realized that abortion doesn't just end a pregnancy, it kills an innocent human being. Such terms as zygote, embryo, or fetus are simply terms that refer to age, like infant, toddler, and adult, and do nothing to diminish the humanity of the child.
So that's would be the procedure. Um, Someone in the comments didn't like that. I guess I just lost a follower. Well, I think it's important for people to know, even if even if we believe that it's wrong. I think it's still important to know the brutality of the actual procedure. I had a friend who I've had on the show before talk about her second trimester abortion. She was around the same time as Kate Cox is about now, but and she didn't have a medical complication. She just wanted to have a blank slate, according to her. She was in love with a guy who didn't love her, but she at the time didn't see that. But she was about to graduate high school, and she just sometimes people are like, I don't understand. No one would wait that long. No one would wait that long. She was mulling it over. She didn't know. She didn't know. She didn't know if she wanted to keep it. She didn't know how to tell her mom. And eventually, when she worked up the courage, her mom was upset, but her mom said it was her decision. And so she opted to have an abortion for it to be like a blank slate, in her opinion. And so she decided to um have the procedure, and it was 2 days preparing her cervix, like she said. And the anesthesia or whatever didn't work um the first day when they had to do something, and she could feel like the doctors like tugging on her insides, and she just like passed out from the pain, and then she had to like ended up paying more money so they could, I guess, increase the dosage and stuff. um but it really left her with trauma. um with how she described it, I'm like, that sounds like PTSD, because even if you, for the longest time, I didn't know that she had an abortion until she came out with a book and had wrote about it, and she wanted my help with it. And at first she didn't get into a lot of details, and I said, it kind of feels like I'm reading Cliff Notes version of your life. And then she had a bunch more details. I'm like, man, this sounds like a horror story. And but at the time, she would, I had asked her to come on my show, not the last time, but the first time I asked her to come on my show and I interviewed her. um she, at the time, she said when someone still mentioned abortion, like, she could, I don't know, feel remnants of that pain, and her stomach would just start doing all kinds of flips and other stuff. And so she's, I suppose, healed from that now. And through the grace of God, she's forgiven herself, and doesn't have any sort of, I guess, mental um scars about it. But she does realize that she did take a life. And I guess I apologize if that wasn't enough of a trigger warning. um but I guess when it started, you could have paused it or whatever. But yeah, I don't, I guess, regret showing that, because I do think there's a lot of people who don't know what it looks like, and don't know what it entails. um and even people who say that they think that it is murder, they'll still go and say that they think someone else should be allowed to do that. So if you think that, um I guess I just want you to know what you're advocating for. But the reason why I showed that, talking about that procedure, is they're talking about all these different risks that occur, and some of those risks that they're afraid of are things that could happen in this particular um procedure as well. So it just really seems like it's more about the fact that the baby has a disability and a fatal diagnosis, or it could be fatal, likely fatal. um so I think it's more of a case of eugenics and euthanasia than anything else. So again, I talk about different stories, and I mentioned like two that I mentioned in the book, about two people who had a diagnosis with their child and went through this. And I've been reading about parents who had children who survived with trisomy 18, or had a couple years with their child, or just had a couple moments with their child. And they talked about how hard it was, but they talked about how worth it was. And that doesn't mean that it's going to feel worth it to every parent. So I don't think we should have that expectation of all people. um but there's also the case where people have gotten bad diagnoses, and then the doctors have been wrong, or there's been turnarounds. But again, it is very, very likely, very possible, it happens all the time, that we lose children. And I mentioned in the Bible how David got your child is going to die. And despite the fact that a prophet told him that your child is going to die, he still labored in prayer for that child, because that was his way of still loving that child for as long as he could. And actually, when the child passes, like, servants were like scared to even tell him. And then after he like realized they're being weird, and he's like, the child passed, and they're like, yeah. So he, cleaned himself up and anointed himself, and they're like, what's up? And he's like, well, they have now passed, and they're not gonna come back to me. I'll have to go to them one day. um So he had to figure out a way to kind of to carry on with his life after that. But in the time that his child was alive, he did what he could, um, which was to pray. And that was his way of doing what he could for his child. So it's a really really difficult circumstance, certainly. And I do question there are some state laws that do have exceptions for fetal anomaly, like in Florida. But there's people who think that the Florida bill that has a lot of exceptions, it has a lot of exceptions, are still too extreme, because on the elective abortions, it still only allows you to do it at 6 weeks. So I guess technically that if you're doing it off of fetal anomaly, that's still kind of elective, but um, it allows for life of the mother. It allows for like bodily injury. It allows for rape and incest up to 15 weeks. Um, and it allows for fetal anomaly. So only between like a certain amount of time, like I can't remember the week cutoff, but it's pretty late. After a while, it's like just have the baby, guys. Um, so it has all those exceptions, but people don't like the fact that um after 6 weeks, you can't have an abortion if you forgot to take your birth control, or just failed, or you had a one night stand, or you want that blank slate. You know, people say that's still too extreme. So if people are willing to make those compromises, and to me, those are some big compromises that don't jive all the way with the ideology of being pro-life. But people are like, you need nuance, and you need to make compromises. So if you make those compromises there, people still see it as extreme. When Lindsey Graham, who I'm not a fan of, but before this was after Roe v. Wade fell. It was before the midterms. And he brought up abortion, and people were like, "Bro, why'd you say anything?" He just kind of let it go. But he said, you know, if they have to do some kind of surgery at like 15 weeks, they'll do like pain meds to the baby and stuff at by 15 weeks. And there's all this talk about pain and when they can feel it, and so we just want to be on the safe side and say 15 weeks is like when we want to cut off. So he said we want to, cut off abortion at 15 weeks. And people are like, "Oh, there's a ban. It's a ban. It's a ban. Oh my gosh." And yeah, it's a ban, but another way to look at it is it would be a federal allowance of abortion up into 15 weeks. Now, if we talk about abortion past 15 weeks, people are all like, "Oh, but it's so rare after that time, and most are done the first trimester." Yet they flipped out at Lindsey Graham's suggestion. Now, most Americans are on, once you get to like allowing up to 15 weeks, you're in a majority of where Americans agree on like where cutoff should be. It's only like um there's a CAPS Harvard Harris poll um that said like 10% want it like up to the moment of birth, which I still think is pretty high and cuckoo. But most people don't want it past like 15 weeks. But they were so mad at Lindsey Graham because they don't want there to be any compromises. And even if you um when Newsom was on stage with Gavin, when Gavin Newsom was on stage with DeSantis during the debate on Hannity's show, Hannity was like, "I want to nail it down. Do where's your maximum on abortion?" And so he didn't really want to say. He was doing the dance, and so and he's like, we allow up to like fetal viability, and it doesn't happen after that time unless it's like a medical emergency. Sean's just like, "Well, do you believe that if there's no medical emergency, you should still be able to have an abortion?" And you wouldn't really say, because the truth is that they still think, regardless of whether there's a medical emergency, that you still should be able to have one after that time. And women who abort late term, they abort late term for a lot of reasons that people do it early. So a lot of people talk about compromises, but they aren't really too fond of the compromise, especially not activists. This particular case with Kate Cox, I question I don't question her, and I can understand why she wanted one, but I there was just no way that it was going to survive. So I questioned what was the end game there. And we know that people do lawsuits to try to break down court cases. I mean, Roe v. Wade was meant to break down abortion restrictions, and the Roe in the case, she was. They said that she was sexually assaulted and impregnated and stuff, and she that wasn't true, and she ended up having her baby, from my understanding. But people will find a case, like very much like with the Dobbs situation. They look at cases that they think will go up to different levels, and then eventually make a big change. And I mean, I know people on uh, TikTok and other places who are like, I purposely poured money into the Dobbs decision because I thought it was going to go up to the Supreme Court, and they're right. So we do it on our side. They do it on their side. So I do think that um, she was used for political reasons, because the actual lawsuit, again, didn't it wasn't going to pass the sniff test. I don't understand why the doctor didn't just flat out just go ahead and say it's my reasonable medical judgment, and opted to just say good faith instead, because that was they plainly stated a lower standard that wouldn't be accepted for the exceptions. So I hope I'm um looking at some of the comments. I mean, I hope I'm just kind of riffing. I got done reading this stuff not too long ago. Someone said, I don't understand why having this baby affects anything at all for a future pregnancy. I personally would want to be with my baby as long as possible to get the baby growing until it's born. I mean, I think that's the right call. I think that's the moral call. I can understand that being um, emotionally very hard for a woman to do. Um, Especially if you want to make sure that you have more kids, and think about how fatalistic so many people around you might be, including the medical professionals around you. I already talked about how um there was one father, he found out his baby had trisommy 18, and basically he was unpersoned. And so if you're already kind of weighing pros and cons, and then your family's talking about it, your husband, your kids, they maybe want more siblings for them, and you just want to make sure that you're okay, and you don't want to have to go through that burden of carrying that baby who's not going to make it. I get it, especially if they're selling like, hey, if you have this abortion, it's they're saying it's the most safe thing. They kept saying in the actual lawsuit that that she recognizes it's the safest way forward for her. And I don't know about that, but there's still definitely risks to it. And then on top of that, you are deliberately taking a life. Now, people will say that it's so cruel to force um, any woman to carry a baby. But the question, bans aren't about forcing women to do something. I mean, because you're technically you're technically already pregnant, you're technically already carrying the baby. The ban is about stopping the ban is about stopping an act of force. The ban is about saying you don't have the right to deliberately end the life. It's not like there's a button again, like an abortion is a button that just makes the baby like it didn't exist. That's not what an abortion is. And it's not like we're stopping you from hitting the reset button. That's not what a ban is. A ban is saying that we recognize that there's a conflict of rights issue here, that you have your bodily autonomy. We also believe the baby has bodily autonomy, but the baby's right to life is at jeopardy. And we would like to maximize the most liberty in the situation. Therefore, the natural progression here, the baby being born, is we feel is the right thing to do, and we want to protect them, and we don't want to provide access and the tools and the resources and the accomplices and the immunity if you decide to conspire with these people to end that child's life. Like, if you can't conspire with your pediatrician to kill your toddler or your newborn, just rewind time back a little bit. Just rewind it back. That same human being that you can't conspire with your pediatrician to kill, why should you be able to conspire with another medical professional to end their life? And if you're just going to say it's because it's in your body, um, again, it's going to be removed one way or another. To maximize the most liberty would be to allow it to take the natural course. There's also the questions of how the baby get there. Like, you initiated the process, it wouldn't be there unless the baby didn't just, get an AR-15 and say, I'm coming in here, this is my womb now. That's not what happened. So these are very complicated issues. And I hope I explained the case well enough, and the position well enough. I'm kind of riffing off here, but I do cover it, I think, more elegantly in the book, with different examples. But while we want to encourage people through to make, I guess, the right moral decisions, don't be too I guess, cruel toward the people who don't feel that they have the strength to make it right now. I still don't think it should be like legal, I guess, but I can understand, certainly. Well, I can sort of. I'm not in that situation. I've never been in that situation. You can't fully grasp that kind of pain. You can't. I can only speculate. Let me look at some more comments. Yeah, didn't have any like really opposition besides one person who's didn't like the abortion video, but people need to know. I don't like seeing it, but the it is so hard to talk about the reality of these things when you can't show it. Like, if I put an image of what happens, like on Twitter, or not on Twitter, but on like TikTok or something, uncensored, it'll probably be like taken down. And if you have posters or something, Abolition Rising, they don't care. They'll have like their posters. They'll go out there, and people will have really negative reactions to the shocking graphic nature of the pictures with the babies and the blood and the being torn apart and all that stuff. And they're like, that's not appropriate. And they'll be, more offended by the revelation of what's actually happening than what is actually happening. And there was a saying that if there were windows, if women's bellies had windows, we really wouldn't have abortions. And the co-founder of NARAL, once I think the invention of the sonogram happened, he was like, oh shoot, change of heart as technology advanced. I like to follow this account on Facebook of a woman who just posts like 3D ultrasounds, and sometimes she'll show a picture of the baby after they're born and a picture of their ultrasound, and they're making the same faces, they're making the same gestures. You can see their features so clearly. And I like to follow that account because I think it just humanizes the baby so much in the womb, just to get that revelation of it's the same person. So if you wouldn't think it was okay to euthanize them outside of the womb. I don't think it would be okay to do it, especially so late when pain could arguably be felt. I mean, the nerves and other stuff start kind of developing pretty early. Whether um, it arguably people argue they could possibly feel in the first trimester, but people say, well, they don't have the consciousness to really perceive that they're in pain. I don't know how much that really makes it better, but I think pain is there's a lot about pain we don't know. We used to operate on babies like in the 80s, not too long ago, without pain meds because they thought they didn't really feel them because they had like limited reaction. And I'm not joking. You can look it up. So, and at that point in time, it's not that there wasn't like some different like medical stuff that wasn't like contrasting the practices at that time. It just, I guess, took a minute, and then people were rightfully outraged that people were operating on newborns and stuff without any sort of pain medication and stuff. So I think there's so much about consciousness we don't understand. There's so much about pain and stuff that we don't comprehend and grasp. And that's why, I mean, I think we're safe with the consistent standard of life starts at conception. But there's a lot to argue beyond that. But as far as this case, the Supreme Court, I think, made the only decision that they could make. So, you guys are armed, I think, with enough facts, and you guys can go read it yourself. And I will get back to making the article about it and post it, and you guys can share that around. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed me kind of spilling my thoughts about all this. And, sorry I didn't do the trigger warning with the video, but it is what it is. But I guess I hope you enjoyed this in-depth conversation. Yeah, someone I don't know if you mind if I show your comments. I'm just going to read it. It's crazy to me how people think she's justified for wanting the abortion. She literally said she wants to abort this one and try again because this one is disabled. It's ableism. It's disgusting. That's why I was concerned reading the brief. When I read the lawsuit, I was like, there's no way. I was shocked. And I read like basically that portion of stuff to you guys, what she said. Would you have put that in a lawsuit? Trying to get them to overturn make an exception for their strict abortion ban. So that's why I've kind of moved to this conspiratorial, like, I don't think they really wanted to if they could have hit at the law enough to make those exceptions for when the truth is that she's mostly making the case for fetal anomaly. That's what it's like kind of more clearly about, because they didn't make a good case that she actually qualifies for the life of the mother. They flat out said it wasn't an imminent danger and stuff. It's mostly those circumstances on top of the fact that the baby has a disability and won't live long. So if they could get that passed, great. Or if they could affect that in the courts or whatever, great for them. Opens up the door for other things and more abortions. But if they really wanted it to last, they should have made a better case, left some things out, reworded some stuff. So I'm at the point where I have to question, and I think I'm leaning toward assuming that they just wanted to be able to have this outrage around this story. So it helps to just make abortion laws fall. But again, if we allowed more exceptions, like in the Florida case, would they be okay with that? Or if we just went straight to 15 weeks, would people be okay with it? No, abortion activists still want more and more and more and more and more. And they'll keep fighting from their end to get all the way to basically having situations where you could do it up into the well, people say moment of birth, but I will say I think we should phrase it as they believe that a woman should have a right to abort viable, healthy babies. Because if you say up to the point of birth, people kind of check out like that's not doesn't happen. That's not true. Whatever. I mean, partial birth abortion is technically abortion up to the moment of birth, but whatever. They're going to keep pushing on that end, and the consistent position on the pro-life end is that when our lives begin, that's when our right to life should begin. And I know there's people who want to meet in the middle with all this kind of nuance and stuff, but a lot of positions don't make a lot of sense. We can debate about it. We can debate about it. But I think there's really only two consistent positions. The one where the woman, it's in her body, so the woman just gets full right to do whatever, and until the point where it's out of her, or we're going to consider both these people in both their inherent value, and we're going to try to make maximize the most liberty as possible, and our decisions are going to be life affirming. So that's why every pro-life, law on the books in the US has some kind of exception for life of the mother. But other than that, that's like that's end of the spectrum, and that's the other end of the spectrum. Anyway, I'm just going to be rambling now, so I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you guys for being with me. Again, if you go to my website, check out my different stuff, and if you haven't read Of Course God is Blatantly Against Abortion, I recommend that you get that. I do talk about this topic and other situations, like essay and life of the mother, and so on top of like the theological stuff. So it's a very well-rounded book. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. You can get it in paperback. You guys can get it in ebook. Let me see if I can find that one quote. Ember, the baby I was talking about, she lived 1 hour and 6 minutes. And the baker said, we loved her well, and it was life changing for our whole family. And I said, I don't know if there is a pain in this life worse than losing a child, but for whatever amount of time we have with our children, do we love them well? We are not only called to love our children as parents in the natural, but we are children of God, called to love them as beings who are also loved by God. So I recommend you check out the book. God bless you guys, and I will see you tomorrow.